Welcome back to the Red Dice Diaries, and in this GM's Tips video I'm going to be talking about a concept that was discussed in a conversation I had with a number of people about falling damage in Fate on Google Plus recently. In that conversation, Fred Hicks mentioned the concept of failing forward. So what do we mean by failing forward? Well, in essence what it means is when the dice in a particular role in an RPG would have previously indicated a simple failure, instead of just saying to the player, bad times, you failed on that roll, what you do is you allow the action to succeed but at a major cost. And this is a concept that I appear to have completely missed, but is actually enshrined in the Fate core book, as Fred was good enough to point out, and I've also seen it in Dungeon World, and I'm sure it's in a couple of other games. So to give you an example of how this works, let's say we've got a player character fleeing from the police force. The player makes his roll to get away from the police and fails. Rather than just saying, no, you've not managed to escape, bad times, and playing out the consequences, what I might instead do as the GM is say, you have managed to escape from the police, but unfortunately not before they've seen you and got a good enough description that they are able to put out an all points bulletin on you. This means that the police in the rest of the city will be on the lookout for the player character, potentially making their life a good deal more complicated in the future. So why would you use the concept of failing forward? Well, effectively what it boils down to is that a simple failure within an RPG isn't really very interesting at all, and this is something I wholeheartedly agree with. There can be little more disheartening than simply being told by a GM that due to a bad roll you failed. For instance, let's say you're playing a character who is an amazing archer. The character in his background has been practicing with the bow ever since they were a small child, and you have a nigh on unassailable skill when it comes to archery. Let's say you're competing in a tournament and a pivotal plot point rests on you succeeding in that tournament. If you just happen to get a bad roll, that could completely derail the session and the plot and could result in a greatly decreased amount of enjoyment for the players and probably the GM as well. Because obviously the GMs actually want the plot to progress. Now obviously that's a simple example, and I'm sure most GMs, if it was absolutely necessary for the archery contest to take place, and if the player had such a great skill at it, then they would simply not call for a roll. But you can see my point of how a failure could derail a session and a plot. What failing forward suggests is that instead of simply saying, no, you can't, you've not succeeded at that, you failed, you allow the action to succeed, but in a way that complicates or adds to the plot and brings an increased amount of complication into the player character's life. The benefits of this are that the players don't get disheartened by failure. It removes the chance that a simple bad run of luck or bad dice rolls will derail the plot or the session. It allows you as a GM to add all sorts of interesting wrinkles, complications and additions to your plot that all go towards making the game more interesting, textured and rich. Now this does require, however, the GM to do a little bit of on-the-spot thinking and come up with these complications, which if you're using it constantly or it happens a lot in your game, can strain a GM to come up with these complications or costs on the fly. One of the ways I've found that is very handy for reducing the amount of strain on a GM and the amount of prep that's required is if there's certain situations that occur with some regularity within your game where there's a high to medium chance of failure, but instead of just simply saying no, you failed, you want to use this idea of failing forwards or succeeding with a cost, you actually jot down a few bullet pointed potential costs or complications for these commonly occurring scenarios. Then during the session you can simply pick up your index card, your notebook or whatever, where you've got your sample costs and complications written down, pick one off it, roll it out into play, possibly embellishing it a bit or tweaking it to fit the specifics of the situation, and you're up and running, and it's taking you just a little bit of advanced prep time, but it won't require you to think on your feet quite as much. So that's my view on failing forward. I think it's a very interesting and promising idea that can be used to great effect with a bit of thought from the GM to prevent bad dice rolls and bad luck from derailing a session and from causing player and GM disappointment. If you have any comments on the concept of failing forward, please leave them in the boxes below or hit me up in the Google Plus links. I hope if you enjoy this video you consider clicking on like and subscribe. We put out new videos every Wednesday. Until I see you next time, thank you very much for watching and listening. Take care.